Welcome everybody to episode 3 of Dragoncast. This episode will feature Cell, the genetic terror, the perfect weapon. He happens to also be my second favorite villain of the entire series. This episode will feature nothing but music for him throughout his evolutions. But first I'd like to go through a little segment I simply like to call Fun Facts. This is where I'll give tidbits of information about Dragon Ball that everyone may not know, but chances are hardcore fans like me will probably already know all about it. Okay, we'll get to the first one. Did you know that Namekians in the manga had 3 fingers and 1 thumb per hand, whereas in the anime they had 4 fingers and 1 thumb per hand, just like humans? And it seems like their transition between the manga and the anime, they may have evolved a little bit. Alright, second fact for you. In the manga, Frieza was the one that killed Dende's little brother Cargo, whereas in the anime, Frieza had Dodoria do it. Either way, you gotta feel bad for that little brat. And the third fact, which has to do with Cell, before we get into his music, is that in the manga and in the anime, Perfect Cell ended up spitting out 7 Cell Juniors to deal with the Z Senshi, but when Super Saiyan 2 Gohan killed them all, an 8th one appeared out of nowhere, and it sure as hell didn't help their chances. So, that didn't do a whole lot for them. Okay, well, that'll be all the facts I'll give for now. Don't want to give them all out in one episode. So, we'll go ahead and get to the first song. We're going to kick it off with Perfect Cell's theme, The Man 2 Dubstep Remix, right here on Dragoncast.
Complete power. Observe my defense. Kid, are you impressed by what you see?
Is that all you've got? Is that all you've got? Is that all you've got? Is that all? Is that all? Is that all you've got?
And that was Imperfect Cell's theme by Bruce Falconer. You know, one of the coolest things about Cell was how he absorbed people. You know, I really loved that scene when Piccolo showed up and that fat rich guy was trying to pay him off to get Cell off of him. And it just slowly showed Cell just sucking up his life force, and he became so wrinkly and shriveled up like a shrunken head before he disappeared, and Cell gobbled him up. Yeah, it's a pretty sick way to go. And I always thought it was, you know, pretty badass looking. A lot of people make jokes about how Cell swallows people up his ass, but I don't know, I kind of liked how he did that with his tail. And the way he got 17 and 18 was a little bit different. He kind of swallowed them whole. I kind of preferred the way he absorbed regular humans and whatnot when he stabbed them and just sucked them up slowly and painfully. Alright, well, we're going to take a commercial break, and when we get back, Cell's quest for perfection continues. And welcome back to Dragoncast, everybody. That was Super Perfect Cell's theme by Bruce Falconer. You know, now that Cell has become perfect, I think it's time we go over his journey to become complete, which was pretty awesome if you ask me. He was one of the only villains to really use cunning stealth to make sure that they didn't get in his way before he reached his goal, suppressing his power and being one step ahead of them all the time. Is something none of the other villains really did too well. He had really great deceptive wit, the way that he tricked Vegeta into letting him go find 18 so that he could become perfect. Of course, it is Vegeta. It's not too hard to get one past him, but he used some deceptive skills to really get his way on that one. And of course, the way he hunted 17 and 18 down without help from any foot soldiers or minions, he pretty much did it all on his own, aside from Vegeta's help, that is, but that's because of his own ignorance. Cell did create the Cell Juniors later on, but that was after he had already gotten 17 and 18. Pretty much aside from those, he did everything all himself, which is something else a whole lot of other villains didn't do except Boo. He kept his perfect form even after losing 18 and self-destructing. I always thought that was kind of cool. I wasn't sure how he was going to get through that the very first time I saw the self-destruction scene. And despite losing to a child, and honestly, if you're going to lose to a child, it might as well be a badass like Super Saiyan 2 Gohan, but despite that, he was still the perfect weapon in my opinion. Just all the different characters that were incorporated into his DNA and all the techniques and skills that he had. He was one of the most skilled villains of the entire series in my opinion. And because of that, those are all things that make Cell pretty awesome. And, you know, Frieza will always be my favorite villain, but Cell, he's a very close second. Okay, we're going to get to the last song here of this episode, and many of you have already heard this one, but I just love it so much, and since it's related to Cell, I decided to play it again. So here we go with Perfect Cell Step by Weeping Midwinter, here on Dragoncast. And that does it for episode 3, everybody. Thank you very much for listening. I hope some of you learned a few things and learned a new fondness for selling his badass music. On the next episode, we'll be talking all about the different various Dragon Ball games that have existed since the 90s. Some of them good, some of them bad. Some of them I've never played, but there sure is no shortage of them, so we should have plenty to talk about. Alright, everybody. Good night.